Absolutely. Well, deforestation and land use change constitutes about a sixth of our problem. Somewhere around 15% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions are derived from deforestation, which is greater than the entire transport sector, all cars, trucks, ships, and planes combined. So it's a major part of our problem. And the mechanism that has been agreed within the UNFCCC, reducing emissions from deforestation, or REDD+, as you noted, is an immediate solution. We have the technology, we know how to manage and conserve natural forests. It's a fleeting opportunity, because if we deforest them, then we won't have that opportunity 10 years hence. And it's essential to the climate solution. If deforestation continues apace, we will not hit safe limits of climate stabilization. We will not hit that 2 degrees target. Even if measures are taken in every other sector, dramatic measures to reduce emissions, if deforestation continues, we lose.
Is REDD+ working as well as it was intended, as well as it should be doing? I've heard a fair number of criticisms that REDD+ hasn't been clearly defined. There is still some confusion over the basic elements of REDD+. Is that what you find?
Well, it's an interesting point of transition of REDD+. I would say in the early years of REDD+, Bali through Copenhagen, it had that shiny new glittery appeal of a silver bullet. Potential silver bullet solution to climate change. We've now entered into the phase where there's greater recognition of the complexity surrounding transforming economies to incorporate a value for carbon in standing forests, so attributing a value for forests that never really existed in our economic system previously, and as a basis of that, from that value, transforming developing economies to provide an incentive for maintaining carbon in standing vegetation, as opposed to transforming those landscapes to productive uses, agriculture, mining, livestock, etc. So REDD is not merely a mechanism by which carbon reserves are created, new forms of protected areas are created, and if that's the case, frankly, we'll have a chain of carbon reserves around the world, but we won't have a climate solution. REDD is really intended to be an incentive to transform developing economies particularly, but transform the basis of management of our lands and our forests to incentivize the maintenance of carbon. And to that extent, we're in the more difficult, I think it's the more interesting phase of how do you scale up REDD beyond a carbon project to a basis for low carbon development. I don't think that it's certainly far too early to say if it's succeeded or failed. We're in the early stages of determining how to integrate that into a development plan for a given nation, into an effective economic incentive. And frankly, I think the missing element in REDD, and something that needs to be achieved in the next 3 to 5 years, is the scale of investment necessary for this to be truly transformative. The government of Norway has been far ahead of all other nations in providing support for the development of REDD. And in the country of Indonesia, for instance, they have agreed to invest $1 billion in their national REDD program. And $1 billion is a lot of money for forest conservation. $1 billion is not a lot of money relative to the size of the Indonesian economy, relative to the size of the Brazilian economy, certainly, where another $1 billion has been invested in REDD. And for it to be transformative, REDD needs to get to the scale where it's a viable land use option, and not just a project investment.
Another vital natural resource, water. We're here in Doha, where there's not a great deal of it, not a great deal of potable water to be had here. What kind of work are you doing on this vital natural resource?
It's an interesting situation here in Doha, and it's perhaps the perfect place to be for a climate change conference of this urgency, because of the importance of the freshwater scarcity in this region. Freshwater will be most likely the most immediate impact felt by humanity of climate change. It is unquestionably the most urgent climate adaptation issue. And it's an interesting contrast and irony in that while the negotiations here proceed at truly a glacial pace, we're losing all of our glaciers. All deglaciation is happening in all mountain systems, including the highest. The Tibetan Plateau is warming at 3 times the baseline rate, 3 times faster than any other place on Earth, or the mean for the planet. So anticipating how freshwater systems are going to be changed, how climate will impact precipitation patterns, the seasonality of freshwater flows, soil moisture capture, and how freshwater basins will be modified by climate change is really vital to an effective climate solution. Conservation International and our partners are working on an approach to freshwater adaptation that has principles of maintaining connectivity across freshwater basins, maintaining the connectivity of riparian forests, of freshwater ecosystems and biodiversity to allow for that adaptation, maintaining environmental flows as we develop infrastructure. And it's not one or the other. It's not that we should no longer develop infrastructure because we have to maintain the pristine nature of our freshwater systems. It's rather we recognize that humans will demand more energy, will demand more water for agriculture, and that infrastructure development is thus part of our future. But if we design infrastructure that has a life of decades to centuries without anticipating how the ecosystems upon which that infrastructure may change, the likeliness of them becoming obsolete is pretty high. So we are working to inform infrastructure development and basin-wide management of climate variance possibilities and how to effectively integrate natural ecosystems into management of those basins for greater freshwater security, food security, energy security, economic security.
I mean, you talked just now about the glacial rate of progress being made here at COP18. I mean, there's come a time where you begin to lose faith in the process, in the COP18, in the COP process in general, or should we be working, should organisations like Conservation International, I mean, is it worth your while even attending the COP meetings? That's
an excellent question. I mean, it's in some senses it is a necessity. It's not a perfect system. It is the framework that we have. We do need a global framework for to set targets for mitigation, to set mechanisms for coherence and consistency in determining what constitutes an effective emissions reduction and how that's achieved, for monitoring and tracking progress towards hitting our global targets. Is it an entity that should address all matters related to climate change? Certainly not. It's not a mechanism that has the necessary flexibility or rapidity of response necessary to address what is an uncertain and changing dynamic. So we need the global framework. We need to influence that global framework, but we shouldn't rely upon it solely. I think that we're seeing here in Doha, and we've seen frankly for the past couple of years, that we've had great expectations for what the UNFCCC is to achieve. And once we come to the conference, we recognize that this is nearly 200 nations arguing for their sovereign self-interest. We're likely to drive towards a least common denominator decision. So let's recognize that that least common denominator should set the global goals, should set the basis of transactions, what constitutes an emissions reduction good, and provides a framework for action beyond the pace of negotiation, action by coalitions of nations that recognize a solution and are willing to deliver on it. The REDD+ partnership, for instance, which is a partnership of 75 countries developed and developing that recognize the opportunity and urgency of REDD and are catalyzing investment and development of the REDD sector at a faster pace than what's being achieved in the negotiations. The efforts by local governments, local communities, and multi-stakeholder partnerships of NGOs, government donors, private sector, and developing country communities that are advancing models of climate change solutions and providing the basis for their scaling up. So it's frustrating here. We expected much greater progress. We will hope to see at least a sustaining of the momentum that's already been secured, that we're not revisiting agreements that have already been agreed to. I think a critical element is defining what level of financing will be provided in the post-fast start period in the next, prior to a 2015 agreement, sustaining, frankly, increasing the level of financing to developing countries for mitigation and adaptation actions.